Let me ask you a question. What does sodomy laws in Jamaica, Uganda, Singapore, and India all have in common? They're leftovers, not traditional, not sacred, not cultural, just leftovers from the British Empire. And unfortunately, we're still joking on them. The British didn't just colonize the land, they colonized the law, intimacy, and identity. They exported their shame like it was fine china. One of the empire's favorite exports, 377 of the Indian Penal Code, passed in 1861, it criminalized carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Which, let's be honest, it is legalese, for we're not going to define it, so we can arrest whoever we want. And oh, did they. That law got shipped across the empire like it was a care package. Nigeria, Kenya, the Caribbean, you name it. Section 377, or its legal cousin, was planted right into their books. Before the British came, many of these regions had gender diversity, same-sex relationships, queer roles woven into their cultural fabric. And then, boom, colonizers showed up and declared queerness a sin and a crime, and used the law to back it up. And the wild part? These laws are still alive in over 30 countries today. Literal colonial zombies. So what did queer people do? We adapted. We built lives in secret. We used loopholes, camouflage, code, and we survived the empire without their permission. And one of the most fascinating ways we did it, Boston marriages. 2 women, 1 home, 1 life, no men. And somehow, in the 1800s and early 1900s, that was totally acceptable. And I had to stop and ask, why wasn't this scandalous back then? 2 women sharing a mortgage, raising cats, and absolutely not talking to men. In a world that burned witches for way less. And the answer is worse than you think. Because men, and I mean this with my full chest, were terrified of women's brains. In the 19th century, there was this extremely loud belief that if women got too educated, they'd become infertile. I'm not joking. Doctors, real lab coat wearing, published in journals, doctors claimed that if a woman used her brain too much, her uterus would stop working. They said all the blood would go to her head, starve her womb, make her emotionally unstable, sickly, and barren. Too much algebra equals no babies. This idea was so widespread, it literally kept women out of schools, out of voting booths, and sometimes landed them in asylums. Harvard published this. Doctors testified to it. And people believed it. So what happened when 2 women moved in together? Maybe they were teachers, writers, social workers, didn't want husbands, didn't have children, weren't throwing garden parties for suitors. Society looked at them and said, oh, poor dears, their brains ruined their ovaries. And that meant nobody suspected queerness. They didn't see sapphic love. They saw sad spinsters. And in that blind spot, queer women built entire worlds. Jane Addams and Mary Rosette Smith lived and worked together for 4 decades. Sarah Owen Jewett and Annie Fields, same story, matching rings, shared room, deep, loving partnership. Boston marriages weren't just about hiding. They were about choosing each other, choosing freedom, building homes where queerness could breathe, even if no one else knew what was going on behind the curtains. Now, let's talk about a different kind of survival. Lavender marriages. Unlike Boston marriages, which were often actual romantic partnerships, lavender marriages, on the other hand, were more about strategy. These marriages were of convenience, usually between a gay man and a lesbian woman, meant to protect each other's public image. Think 1920s to 1950s. Think studio contracts, morality clauses, and don't ask, don't tell. Decades before it had a name. Why lavender? Because lavender was already associated with queerness, soft, defiant, floral, and queer-coded. By the 1950s, we had the lavender scare, where queer people were purged from federal jobs. But long before that, lavender whispered, "We're here. You just don't see us." Some of these marriages were arranged quietly through social circles. Others were born out of deep friendship. It gave queer people the ability to live, or at least perform, the kind of heterosexual respectability the world demanded, while keeping their truth intact behind closed doors. Rock Hudson is the classic example. Hollywood heartthrob, married to Phyllis Gates, in what many believe was a lavender marriage. It protected his image, kept the gossip columns at bay, and gave him the freedom to live, even if it meant hiding. These marriages weren't always cold. They were often tender and protective, queer in their own quiet way. Because even when the law said you can't exist, we found ways to exist anyways. And all this, the Boston homes, the lavender vows, the medical nonsense about women's brains overheating, it happened while colonial sodomy laws were busy reshaping entire countries. India didn't overturn Section 377 until 2018. Uganda still uses British-imposed sodomy laws to justify horrific anti-LGBTQ plus crackdowns. These aren't local customs. These are colonial ghosts still haunting queer bodies. And yet, we still lived. We built love in the shadows. We wrote poetry in code. We held each other in quiet homes and in loud protest lines. We found ways to be ourselves, even when the world demanded that we disappear. Queer people don't just survive empires. We outlive them.